My name is Daniel, and for most of my life, I thought I had everything figured out. I wasn't anyone extraordinary, just an ordinary man trying to do his best. I worked a steady job, paid my bills, and showed up to church every Sunday. From the outside, my life seemed fine, predictable even, but on the inside, it was a different story. I always felt like I was missing something, like there was a deeper purpose to life that everyone else seemed to understand except me. I prayed, of course. I went through the motions, saying grace before meals, bowing my head during Sunday services, but it often felt hollow. My prayers felt more like whispers into the void than conversations with God. The truth was, I had questions I was too afraid to ask out loud. Did my life even matter? Did the little things I did, the kind words, the small sacrifices, make any difference? Was I really living the way God intended? Or was I just drifting through life, checking off boxes and hoping it all added up to something meaningful? These thoughts gnawed at me, especially at night. I'd lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying moments from my day. Did I say the right thing to my coworker who seemed upset? Should I have helped that homeless man on the corner, even though I was running late? Were these things important, or were they just fleeting moments in an endless cycle of life? I didn't talk to anyone about these feelings. It wasn't that I didn't trust my friends or family. It was that I didn't even know how to put it into words. How do you explain feeling empty when you have so much to be grateful for? How do you confess that you're afraid you're wasting your life when everyone else seems to think you're doing just fine? Still, I carried on. Day after day, I went to work, smiled at my neighbors, and tried to be the person I thought I was supposed to be. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that there had to be more. I just didn't know how to find it. That all changed one rainy afternoon in late spring. It was supposed to be an ordinary day. I had just finished running some errands and was heading home. The rain was coming down hard, and the roads were slick. I remember gripping the steering wheel tightly, squinting through the windshield as my wipers struggled to keep up with the downpour. The intersection ahead was clear, and the light was green. I thought I had plenty of time. But just as I entered the intersection, I saw it. A large truck speeding toward me from the left. It must have missed the red light, and now it was barreling straight toward me. Time seemed to slow down in that moment. I remember the sound of tires screeching, the blaring horn of the truck, and the sheer force of the impact as metal collided with metal. The world spun around me, a blur of noise and chaos. Then, everything went silent. When I opened my eyes, I expected to see the crumpled remains of my car, the rain still pouring outside. But instead, I saw nothing. I was no longer in my car. I wasn't on the road. I wasn't anywhere I could recognize. I tried to move, but my body felt strange, light, almost weightless. I looked down at myself and saw nothing. No hands, no feet, no physical form. It was as if I had left my body behind entirely. Panic set in. Where was I? What was happening? Was I dead? The thought hit me like a tidal wave, and for a moment, fear consumed me. I thought about everything I hadn't done, the questions I hadn't answered, the purpose I hadn't found. Was this it? Was my life over? As I drifted in this strange, endless void, I began to notice something, a faint light in the distance. It was small at first, barely noticeable, but it grew brighter with each passing moment. There was something about the light that drew me in, something warm and inviting. Without knowing how, I began to move toward it. The fear that had gripped me moments before started to fade, replaced by a sense of peace I couldn't explain. The closer I got to the light, the more I felt like I was being drawn into something greater than myself, something I had always longed for, but never fully understood. As the light enveloped me, I felt a presence, gentle, loving, yet incredibly powerful. I knew, without a doubt, that I was no longer in the world I had known. I was in the spiritual realm, standing at the edge of something far beyond anything I could have imagined. This was the moment my journey truly began, a journey that would change everything I thought I knew about life, purpose, and the infinite grace of God. The light grew brighter, its warmth pulling me further into this unknown realm. The fear that had initially gripped me began to dissolve, replaced by a strange and soothing calm. I wasn't sure where I was going, or even how I was moving, but I felt as though I were being gently carried by an unseen force. It wasn't frightening. It felt purposeful, as though I were being guided somewhere important. As the light enveloped me, my surroundings started to shift. The void faded away, and I found myself standing, or perhaps floating, in a vast expanse. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. The air was alive, shimmering with hues of gold and white, and the atmosphere radiated a peace so profound that I could hardly process it. I couldn't see the edges of this place. It seemed infinite, stretching far beyond my comprehension. I glanced down at myself, expecting to see my physical body, but there was nothing there. I didn't feel incomplete or hollow, though. In fact, I felt whole in a way I never had before. It was as if my very essence, the core of who I was the only thing that mattered here. "Where am I?" I whispered, though no sound left my lips. My question was answered not with words, but with a sensation, a quiet assurance that I was safe, that this place was holy. Ahead of me, the light intensified, and I saw it, a structure so magnificent it took my breath away. It was a library, but not like any library I'd ever visited. The building seemed to pulse with life, its walls made of a translucent material that glowed softly, as though lit from within. The doors were enormous, towering far above me, carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and shimmer as I looked at them. Every detail exuded perfection, beauty, and majesty. As I moved closer, the doors opened soundlessly, revealing the interior. My breath caught in my throat. Shelves stretched as far as the eye could see, spiraling upward and outward in a way that defied logic. The shelves were filled with books and scrolls, each one glowing faintly, as if they contained light within their pages. The air was filled with a gentle hum, almost musical, that resonated deep in my soul. I hesitated at the entrance, suddenly overwhelmed. Who was I to enter such a place? I felt small, unworthy to even set foot in this holy space. Yet, the light that surrounded me seemed to beckon me forward. reassuring me with its warmth. Tentatively, I stepped inside, and the moment I did, a wave of awe washed over me. The atmosphere here was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was thick with wisdom, truth, and an indescribable presence. Each book, each scroll, seemed to radiate knowledge, as though they contained the very essence of life itself. I walked slowly down one of the endless aisles, my eyes scanning the shelves. Each book seemed to glow with its own unique light, some bright and steady, others softer, more subdued. My hand hovered over one of the books, hesitant to touch it. I could feel its energy, as if it were alive, holding secrets I wasn't sure I was ready to know. "You may look," a voice said gently, and I froze. The voice was unlike anything I had ever heard, deep, steady, and filled with unimaginable love. I turned, and there he was. Jesus stood before me, his presence radiating warmth and light. His face was kind, his eyes full of compassion and understanding. I felt no fear, only an overwhelming sense of love and humility. I dropped to my knees without thinking, tears streaming down my face. I couldn't even speak. "Rise," he said, extending his hand toward me. "You are welcome here, Daniel." I stood slowly, trembling. "Lord," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "What is this place?" "This," he said, gesturing around us, "is the library of life. It holds the records of every soul, every thought, every word, and every action. It is where the truth of each life is preserved." My heart raced as I tried to process his words. "The truth of each life," I repeated. "Does that mean my life is here too?" Jesus smiled gently. "Yes, Daniel. Your story is written here, as is the story of every soul created by the Father. Every choice you've made, every word you've spoken, every act of love or neglect. It is all here, recorded in the book of life." I felt a lump form in my throat. The weight of my entire life seemed to press down on me, and I couldn't help but think of all the mistakes I had made, the moments I had fallen short. "Why would you show me this?" I asked, my voice breaking. "I'm not worthy to be here." Jesus stepped closer, placing his hand on my shoulder. His touch was comforting, yet it carried an authority that left no room for doubt. "You are here because I love you, Daniel. You are here to see the truth of your life, not to condemn you, but to show you how deeply you are known, how deeply you are loved, and how much purpose you were created for." Tears streamed down my face as his words sank in. The love in his voice was overwhelming, unlike anything I had ever felt. It wasn't just kindness. It was a love so pure, so unconditional, that it seemed to fill every corner of my being. Jesus turned and began walking deeper into the library, gesturing for me to follow. I moved slowly, still in awe of everything around me. As we walked, I noticed that some of the books on the shelves glowed more brightly than others. Some seemed almost dim, their light flickering faintly. "What do the lights mean?" I asked. Jesus paused, looking at the shelves with a thoughtful expression. "The light reflects the choices made by each soul," he explained. "Every act of love, kindness, and faith brightens the light. Every act of selfishness, neglect, or sin dims it. but the light is never extinguished, because my grace sustains it. I stared at the shelves, my heart heavy with the realization of how much I had taken for granted. How many opportunities had I missed to brighten the light of my own story? How often had I chosen comfort or convenience over love and sacrifice? Jesus stopped in front of a large, ornate book resting on a pedestal. Its cover was embossed with intricate patterns that seemed to shimmer like liquid gold. "This," he said, "is your book of life." I took a step back, overwhelmed. "My life?" I murmured, barely able to look at it. "It's all there?" "Yes," Jesus said, his voice steady. "And now, Daniel, it is time for you to see what has been written." As I stood before the book of life, my heart pounded in my chest, or at least it felt like it did, even though I was no longer in my body. The sheer size of the book was overwhelming, its cover glowing with an otherworldly radiance. It wasn't just light, it was alive, pulsating gently as if it were breathing. The golden patterns on its surface seemed to shift and dance, as though they were responding to the presence of Jesus beside me. My gaze was fixed on the book, but my feet refused to move. A wave of fear and hesitation washed over me. "I don't know if I can do this," I whispered, barely able to lift my eyes to meet Jesus's. What if it's all bad? What if I've wasted my life?" Jesus placed a hand on my shoulder, his touch firm yet comforting. "Daniel," he said, his voice full of love, "this is not about condemnation. This is about truth. You will see your life as it is, nothing more, nothing less. But remember, I am with you. My grace covers all." With a gentle motion, he opened the book. The light from its pages spilled out, illuminating the space around us. It wasn't harsh or blinding. It was warm and inviting, like the first rays of sunlight after a long night. My fear didn't disappear completely, but something in his presence gave me the strength to take a step closer. As I approached, the first page came into focus. It wasn't filled with words like I expected. Instead, it seemed to hold images, scenes from my life, moments captured in perfect detail. They moved and shifted, as if I were watching a living memory play out before my eyes. The first scene was of me as a child, no older than 5 or 6. I was sitting on the floor of my grandmother's living room, surrounded by her worn-out Bible and hymnals. She was singing softly, her voice cracked with age, but filled with faith. I could see myself watching her, captivated by the love in her eyes as she spoke about God's goodness. "That's where it all began," Jesus said softly. "The seeds of faith were planted in you long before you even understood their meaning." Tears filled my eyes as I watched the memory unfold. I had almost forgotten that moment, but seeing it here, I realized how much it had shaped me. My grandmother's faith had been a cornerstone of my childhood, a quiet but powerful influence that had drawn me toward God. The pages turned, and more scenes appeared. Some were joyful, celebrations, acts of kindness, moments when I had chosen to love, even when it was difficult. But then, the tone began to shift. I saw moments I wasn't proud of, times when I had been selfish, when my words had hurt others, when I had chosen convenience over compassion. One memory stopped me in my tracks. It was a scene from my teenage years. I had been walking home from school, headphones in, ignoring the world around me. A classmate I barely knew was sitting on a bench, his face buried in his hands. He looked broken, like he was carrying the weight of the world. I remembered glancing at him, feeling a pang of concern, but I kept walking. I didn't stop. I didn't ask if he was okay. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, my voice shaking. Jesus looked at me, his eyes filled with both sorrow and compassion. "Because every choice matters, Daniel. That moment may have seemed small to you, but it was a missed opportunity to show love. Your classmate was crying out for help, and though you didn't stop, my grace reached him through someone else." The weight of his words hit me like a tidal wave. I hadn't even thought about that moment in years, but now it felt so significant. I realized how often I had overlooked the needs of others, too focused on my own life to see the pain around me. The pages turned again, and I saw more moments of both failure and redemption. I saw the time I forgave a friend who had hurt me deeply, and how that act of forgiveness had healed not only our relationship, but also my own heart. I saw the times I had chosen to pray for others, even when I felt like my prayers were weak or insignificant. Each prayer rose like a beam of light, cutting through the darkness and reaching the heavens. "Do you see now, Daniel?" Jesus said, his voice steady. "Your life is made up of countless choices, some small, some great. Each one creates ripples that extend far beyond what you can see. The love you show, the prayers you offer, the kindness you give, they are never wasted." I nodded, my throat too tight with emotion to speak. I watched as more pages turned, revealing the impact of my actions on others. I saw how a simple word of encouragement I had given to a coworker had inspired her to pursue her dreams. I saw how my decision to volunteer at a local shelter had brought hope to a man who felt forgotten. But I also saw the times when my anger, impatience, or neglect had hurt those closest to me. The weight of it all was overwhelming. "I don't deserve your grace," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Jesus stepped closer, his presence radiating love. "No one deserves it, Daniel. That's why it's called grace. It's a gift, given freely because of my love for you. Your name is written in the book of life, not because of what you've done, but because you chose to believe in me." As he spoke, the pages of the book began to glow brighter. The moments of failure and regret were still there, but they no longer felt like condemnation. Instead, they were reminders of how his grace had covered me, how his love had carried me even when I didn't deserve it. The final page turned, and I saw an image of myself standing in a golden light, surrounded by people. Some of them were familiar, family members, friends, co-workers. Others were strangers. They were smiling, their faces filled with joy and gratitude. "These are the lives you've touched," Jesus said. "Some you knew about, others you didn't. But each one is a testament to the power of love and faith." Tears streamed down my face as I looked at the faces before me. I had spent so much of my life questioning whether my actions mattered, whether I was making any difference at all. Now, standing here, I saw the truth. Every choice, every act of love, every moment of faith had been part of a greater story, a story written by God's hand. As the book closed, Jesus turned to me. Your life is not finished, Daniel. There is still more to write, more love to give, more truth to share. Will you trust me to guide you as you continue your journey? I nodded, my heart filled with both awe and gratitude. Yes, Lord, I said. I trust you. As the book of life closed, I felt the air around me shift. The radiant warmth remained, but now it carried a sense of movement, as if the very space we stood in was alive. Jesus turned to me, his expression full of both love and purpose. Daniel, he said, your choices are not made in isolation. Every decision, every word, every action sends ripples through the lives of those around you. Let me show you. With a wave of his hand, the world around us changed. It was as though a veil had been lifted, and I was suddenly surrounded by scenes from my life. They weren't just memories. They were living, breathing moments, playing out in intricate detail. Each one seemed to pulse with its own energy, connecting to the others in ways I couldn't yet understand. The first scene was one I recognized instantly. It was a small park near my childhood home, and I was about 10 years old. I saw myself sitting on a bench, holding a toy I had brought with me. Nearby, a younger boy was crying, clutching his skinned knee. In the memory, I hesitated, glancing at him, but not moving. Then, after what felt like an eternity, I got up and walked over, handing him my toy to cheer him up. As the scene unfolded, I saw something I hadn't noticed at the time. The boy's tears stopped, and a smile spread across his face. But it didn't end there. The light of his joy seemed to ripple outward, touching the people around him. His mother, who had looked tired and stressed, softened as she watched her son laugh. She later spoke kindly to a stranger she passed on the way home, a stranger who, in turn, carried that kindness into their own interactions. I turned to Jesus, my heart pounding. That one moment, it caused all of this? He nodded. Every act of love, no matter how small, has the power to create ripples. You gave that boy hope when he needed it, and that hope spread further than you could ever have imagined. The scene shifted again. This time, it was a memory I'd tried to forget. I was in my early 20s, working at a busy job. I had been frustrated that day, overwhelmed by deadlines and stress. A coworker approached me, her face hesitant, as though she wanted to ask for help. I remembered brushing her off, muttering something curt and dismissive before walking away. The ripple from that moment was very different. I saw her retreat to her desk, her expression falling. She had been struggling with a difficult task and had reached out in desperation, hoping for support. My reaction, though brief and seemingly insignificant, deepened her discouragement. She ended up making a mistake on the project, which led to criticism from her supervisor. The frustration she felt spilled into her interactions at home that evening, creating tension with her family. Tears filled my eyes as I turned to Jesus. I didn't know, I whispered. I didn't mean to hurt her. I know, he said gently, and she knows now too. But this is why every choice matters. You are not condemned for your mistakes, Daniel, but it's important to understand their impact. The scenes continued to unfold, each one revealing the interconnectedness of human lives. I saw a moment where I had encouraged a friend who was struggling with self-doubt. My words, spoken casually, had given her the confidence to pursue a dream she had nearly given up on. Years later, her work had inspired dozens of people, creating ripples of hope and creativity. Then there was the time I had withheld forgiveness from someone who had wronged me. I had held on to my anger, thinking it was justified, but I hadn't realized how it had hardened my heart. The bitterness I carried had affected not just that relationship, but also the way I treated others during that season of my life. The ripples of that choice spread far wider than I had ever imagined. I watched as the threads of my life intertwined with those of others, creating a vast, intricate web of connection. Each choice, whether rooted in love, neglect, kindness, or anger, sent waves through this web, touching lives in ways I had never considered. "Do you see now, Daniel?" Jesus asked, his voice steady but full of compassion. "You were created to be a vessel of my love, to carry light into the lives of those around you. Every choice you make is an opportunity to reflect that love, or to withhold it." I nodded, my heart heavy with both regret and gratitude. "I've failed so many times," I said. "But I've also seen how even small acts of love can make a difference. Is it too late to fix the mistakes I've made?" Jesus smiled, his eyes full of reassurance. "It is never too late. My grace is greater than your failures, and my love has the power to heal what has been broken. The ripples you create now, through kindness, forgiveness, and faith, can bring restoration to the places where harm was done." As he spoke, I saw a new scene unfold. It was a memory from years ago, when I had apologized to someone I had hurt. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it, but now I could see how that moment of humility had mended not only our relationship, but also the wounds that person had been carrying from others. The healing that had begun in them had spread to their interactions with others, creating ripples of reconciliation and peace. The light around us seemed to grow brighter, and I felt a renewed sense of hope. So every choice, every word, every action, it all matters? I asked. "Yes," Jesus said, "but remember, you are not called to carry this weight alone. When you walk with me, I will guide your steps. I will help you choose love, even when it's difficult, and my grace will cover you when you fall." I took a deep breath, letting his words sink in. I had spent so much of my life questioning whether my actions mattered, whether I was making any difference at all. Now I understood the truth. My life was woven into a greater story, one that was filled with purpose and possibility. The scenes around me began to fade, but the impact of what I had seen remained. The ripples of love, forgiveness, and grace were endless, extending far beyond what I could see or imagine. For the first time, I felt the weight of my life, not as a burden, but as a sacred responsibility. Jesus placed his hand on my shoulder once more. "You were created for this, Daniel," he said, "to love, to forgive, to reflect my light in the world. Trust me, and I will show you how." I nodded, my heart full of determination. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. Every choice I made from this moment forward would be guided by the truth I had seen. Every ripple mattered, and I was ready to create ripples of hope and love that would echo into eternity. The air around me seemed to shift once again. The scenes of my life, the ripples of my choices, and the intricate web of connections began to fade, leaving only the radiant presence of Jesus and the book of life before me. I stood there, still reeling from what I had witnessed, the moments of love, the missed opportunities, the harm I had caused, and the unexpected hope I had brought. The weight of it all felt unbearable. I lowered my head, unable to meet his gaze. "Lord," I said softly, my voice trembling, "I've failed so many times. I've hurt people. I've been selfish. I don't deserve your love, let alone to stand here in this holy place." Jesus stepped closer, his light enveloping me in warmth. "Daniel," he said, his voice steady and full of love, "you are here because of my grace, not your perfection. You were never meant to carry the weight of your failures alone. That is why I came, to lift that burden and set you free." Tears filled my eyes as his words washed over me. I felt his hand on my shoulder, a touch so gentle yet so powerful that it seemed to pierce through every layer of shame and self-condemnation I had carried for years. "Look," he said, gesturing toward the book of life. The pages began to turn again, this time revealing moments I hadn't expected to see. They weren't memories of my choices or their ripples. These were moments of divine intervention, times when God's grace had moved in my life in ways I hadn't even realized. The first scene showed me as a young man, sitting alone in my room after a particularly painful argument with my parents. I had been angry, full of pride, convinced that I didn't need anyone's guidance. But as I watched the memory play out, I noticed something I hadn't before. A soft, almost imperceptible light surrounding me as I sat there, my head in my hands. "That night," Jesus said, "you felt lost and abandoned. But I was with you, even then. My spirit was speaking to your heart, softening your anger, and reminding you of my love." I blinked back tears as I saw myself pick up my Bible that night, flipping through its pages, even though I hadn't planned to read it. I remembered feeling a sense of peace that I couldn't explain, a quiet reassurance that everything would be okay. Now I understood where that peace had come from. The next scene showed me years later, standing at a crossroads in my career. I had been faced with a difficult decision. One path offered more money and prestige, while the other was less certain, but aligned more closely with my values. I had agonized over the choice, unsure of what to do, until a friend unexpectedly called me and shared a piece of advice that had tipped the scales. "You didn't realize it then," Jesus said, "but I sent that friend to you. My grace was guiding you toward the path I had prepared for you." I watched as the scene unfolded, showing how that decision had led me to opportunities I never would have found otherwise. Opportunities to grow, to serve, and to make a difference in the lives of others. I felt a surge of gratitude as I realized how God's hand had been at work, even in the moments when I thought I was alone. The pages turned again, and this time I saw moments of my greatest failures, the times I had sinned, hurt others, and turned away from God. Each scene brought a fresh wave of sorrow, but as I watched, something incredible happened. The scenes didn't remain dark. Instead, they were bathed in light, His light. It covered the brokenness, transforming the moments of despair into opportunities for redemption. This, Jesus said, is the power of my grace. Your sins are not ignored, Daniel. They are forgiven. Every failure, every mistake has been covered by my blood. You are not defined by your worst moments. You are defined by my love. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed by the weight of his words. But why? I asked, my voice breaking. Why would you forgive me after everything I've done? Jesus knelt beside me, lifting my chin so I could look into his eyes. Because I love you, he said simply. And my love is not conditional. It is not something you earn. It is a gift, freely given, because you are mine. The tears came freely now, and I felt as though a dam had broken inside me. Years of guilt, shame, and striving to prove my worth melted away in the face of his unconditional love. I had spent so much of my life trying to be enough, trying to earn favor through my actions, only to realize now that I had always been enough in his eyes. The pages of the book of life turned one final time, revealing my name written in bold, glowing letters. The sight of it took my breath away. It wasn't written in ink or etched into the pages. It seemed to be alive, pulsating with light and radiating a sense of permanence. Your name is written here, Daniel, Jesus said, not because of what you have done, but because of what I have done. You placed your faith in me, and that is enough. My grace is sufficient for you. I reached out to touch the letters, and as I did, a wave of peace washed over me. It was unlike anything I had ever felt before, a deep, unshakable assurance that I was loved, forgiven, and secure in him. But what about the times I doubted? I asked. The times I failed to trust you. Jesus smiled, his eyes full of understanding. Even then, my grace was sufficient. Even when you doubted, I remained faithful. My love for you has never wavered, and it never will. I stood slowly, feeling lighter than I ever had before. The weight of my past was gone, replaced by a sense of hope and purpose. I realized that my life wasn't about striving to earn God's approval. It was about living in the freedom of his love and sharing that love with others. As I turned to face him, Jesus extended his hand toward me. Daniel, he said, your story is not over. There is still work to be done, still love to be given, still grace to be shared. Go back and tell others what you have seen. Show them that my grace is greater than their failures, and that their names, too, can be written in the book of life. I nodded, my heart full of gratitude and determination. I will, Lord, I said. Thank you for everything. With that, the light around me began to shift once more, and I knew that my journey was far from over. I had been forgiven, redeemed, and given a mission, and I was ready to fulfill it. The light of the book of life dimmed slightly as it closed, leaving only the radiant presence of Jesus before me. I felt an ache in my chest, not from sadness, but from the sheer weight of what I had just witnessed. My life, with all its highs and lows, had been laid bare, yet I stood here, forgiven and loved beyond measure. I thought that perhaps this was the end of my journey, that I had seen all I needed to see. But then Jesus turned to me, his expression tender yet resolute. "Daniel," he began, his voice steady and full of authority. "What you have seen is not just a reflection of your life. It is also a call to action. The book of life is not merely a record. It is a guide, a glimpse into the purpose for which you were created. Your story is not finished." I stared at him, confused. "A guide? I don't understand, Lord. My life, it feels so small compared to everything you've shown me. What purpose could I possibly have?" Jesus smiled gently, the kind of smile that seemed to see through every doubt and fear. "You were created with a purpose, Daniel. Every person is. The choices you've made, the lessons you've learned, even your failures. They have all been woven into the greater plan I have for you. But the question is, will you trust me to show you the way?" Before I could respond, the space around us transformed. The library faded, replaced by a vast golden field that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. The air was filled with a sense of promise, a quiet yet powerful assurance that something significant was about to unfold. "Come," Jesus said, gesturing for me to walk with him. As we moved through the field, the golden grass seemed to shimmer with every step, as though it were alive. "You've spent much of your life searching for meaning, questioning whether your actions mattered. But now I will show you what your life can become when you live with purpose." He stopped and turned to face me. With a wave of his hand, the air before us shimmered, forming into a series of vivid scenes. In the first, I saw myself speaking to a small group of people. Their faces were a mixture of curiosity and longing, as though they were searching for something they couldn't quite name. I realized I was sharing my story with them, the story of everything I had seen and experienced here. "You will be a witness," Jesus said, his voice calm but firm. "Your story is a testament to my grace, and it will bring hope to those who feel unworthy, unseen, and unloved. Your testimony will remind them that no one is beyond redemption." I watched as the scene shifted. Now I saw myself kneeling beside a young man who looked broken, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I placed a hand on his shoulder, speaking softly, though I couldn't hear the words. Whatever I said seemed to bring him peace, and he lifted his head, his face streaked with tears, but filled with a new light. "You will be a light to the weary and the lost," Jesus continued. "There are many who carry burdens they were never meant to bear. Through you, they will see that my grace is sufficient, even for the heaviest of loads." Another scene unfolded, this one showing me standing in front of a congregation much larger than the first group. I was speaking with passion, my hands gesturing as I shared the truth about God's love and forgiveness. The faces in the crowd were illuminated with hope, their expressions reflecting a newfound understanding of God's grace. "Your purpose is not about perfection, Daniel," Jesus said. "It is about faithfulness. You are not called to change hearts. That is my work. You are called to speak the truth, to plant seeds of hope and faith, and to trust me with the harvest." I turned to him, my mind racing. "But what if I fail?" I asked. "What if I let you down again?" Jesus stepped closer, his gaze steady. You will face challenges, Daniel. The enemy will try to discourage you, to make you believe that your efforts are in vain. But remember this, you are not alone. My Spirit will go before you, preparing the way. When you feel weak, I will be your strength. When you doubt, I will remind you of what you have seen here. The scenes before us shifted once more, showing moments of resistance and hardship. I saw people rejecting my words, turning away, and even mocking me. The sight filled me with dread, but then the vision changed. I saw those same people years later, their hearts softened, their lives transformed. Some were kneeling in prayer, others were sharing their own testimonies of God's grace. Do not measure your success by what you see in the moment, Jesus said. You may not always witness the impact of your obedience, but know that every act of faith, every word spoken in love, will ripple into eternity. Trust me, Daniel. Trust that I am working, even when you cannot see it. I nodded, my heart both humbled and emboldened by his words. I want to do this, Lord, I said, but I don't know where to start. How do I begin? Jesus placed his hand over my heart, and a warmth spread through me, filling me with a sense of peace and clarity. Start with prayer, he said. Seek me in all things, and I will guide your steps. Share your story, not as a burden, but as a gift. Let others see that my grace is greater than their failures, that they are loved beyond measure, and above all, love as I have loved you. The field around us began to glow, the light growing brighter with every word he spoke. Go back, Daniel, Jesus said, his voice both tender and commanding. Live with purpose, love with intention, and trust that I am with you, always. Before I could respond, the light enveloped me completely, and I felt myself being pulled away. The golden field faded, replaced by a sensation of warmth and weight, as though I were being drawn back into my physical body. But even as the spiritual realm receded, the truth of what I had seen and heard remained, etched into my very soul. I awoke with a gasp, the world around me sharp and vivid. The hospital room was quiet, save for the rhythmic beeping of monitors. My body felt weak, but my spirit was stronger than it had ever been. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had been given a second chance, not just to live, but to live with purpose. And so, my mission began. The moment I opened my eyes, the world seemed different. The sterile white walls of the hospital room came into focus, the faint hum of machines and muffled footsteps in the hallway, grounding me back in reality. But everything felt sharper, clearer, as though I were seeing through new eyes. I blinked, the heaviness of my body a stark contrast to the weightlessness I had felt moments, or was it an eternity, before. Tears welled up as the memories of my experience flooded back. The golden field, the book of life, the ripples of my choices, and the overwhelming grace of Jesus. It was all still vivid, as though it had been burned into my soul. I felt a deep ache in my chest, not from the accident that had brought me here, but from the sheer magnitude of what I had been shown. A nurse entered the room, her face lighting up with surprise. "You're awake," she exclaimed. "We weren't sure if—" Her voice trailed off, but I could hear the unspoken words, "If you'd make it." "I'm here," I said, my voice hoarse but steady. "And I have a lot to do." In the days that followed, as my body began to heal, I couldn't stop thinking about the mission Jesus had given me. Every moment felt charged with purpose. Every interaction an opportunity to reflect the love and grace I had experienced. But as much as I wanted to dive headfirst into this new life, I quickly realized that it wouldn't be easy. The first time I shared my story was with my family. Sitting around the dining table, I recounted everything: my near-death experience, the book of life, the life review, and the words Jesus had spoken to me. Their reactions were a mix of awe, skepticism, and confusion. My mother wept openly, my father sat in stunned silence, and my siblings exchanged uncertain glances. "Are you sure it wasn't just a dream?" my brother asked, his tone cautious. "I'm more certain of this than anything else in my life," I replied, meeting his gaze. This wasn't just a dream, it was real, and it's changed everything for me. While some of my family embraced my testimony, others struggled to understand. It hurt to see their doubt, but I reminded myself of what Jesus had said. My role wasn't to convince, it was to share. The seeds I planted were in his hands now. As word of my experience spread, opportunities to share my story began to arise. I was invited to speak at my church, a place I had once attended out of routine, but now entered with a renewed sense of reverence. Standing before the congregation, I felt the familiar tremor of nerves, but as I began to speak, a peace settled over me. I spoke about the book of life and the life review, about how every choice matters, and how the ripples of our actions extend further than we can see. I shared the moments of failure and redemption, the overwhelming power of Jesus' grace, and the mission he had entrusted to me. The reactions were varied. Some people listened intently, nodding in agreement, while others seemed skeptical, their arms crossed and brows furrowed. But what mattered most were the quiet moments afterward, when individuals would approach me, their eyes filled with tears, and say, "Your story gave me hope. I've felt so far from God, but now I want to pray again." These encounters became my fuel. Each person who found comfort or inspiration in my testimony reminded me that the mission wasn't about numbers or grand gestures. It was about individual lives being touched by the truth of God's love. Of course, there were challenges too. Not everyone welcomed my message. Some dismissed it as a hallucination, a byproduct of trauma or medication. Others accused me of seeking attention, their words stinging more than I cared to admit. But in those moments, I would close my eyes and remember the light, the warmth of Jesus' presence, and the words he had spoken. Do not measure your success by what you see in the moment. Trust that I am working, even when you cannot see it. Those words became my anchor, a constant reminder to stay faithful, even when the path was difficult. One day, I was invited to share my story at a youth retreat. The room was filled with teenagers, many of them distracted and skeptical, their attention divided between their phones and whispered conversations. I took a deep breath, praying silently for guidance, and began to speak. I told them about the ripples of our choices, how even small acts of kindness or neglect could change someone's life. I shared the story of my life review, how I had seen both the beauty and the brokenness of my actions, and how Jesus' grace had redeemed it all. By the end of the session, the room was silent. Several students approached me afterward, their questions raw and heartfelt. One young girl, her eyes filled with tears, said, "I've been so angry with God. I thought He didn't care about me. But hearing your story, it makes me want to believe again." Moments like that reminded me why the mission mattered. It wasn't about me. It was about pointing people to Jesus, about helping them see that their lives, no matter how messy or broken, were precious and full of potential. As the months turned into years, I continued to share my testimony wherever I could. Each time, I felt a renewed sense of awe at how God was working through my story. The doubts and fears that had once plagued me no longer held power over me. I knew the truth, that I was loved, forgiven, and called to live with purpose. And so, I leave you with this: your life matters. Every choice you make, every word you speak, every act of love or forgiveness, it all ripples into eternity. You may not always see the impact, but trust that God is working through you in ways you cannot imagine. If you've ever doubted your worth, if you've ever felt like your mistakes have disqualified you from God's love, let me tell you this: His grace is greater. He is not looking for perfection. He is looking for faith. Your name, too, can be written in the book of life. All it takes is a heart that is willing to trust Him, to say yes to His love and purpose. The same grace that changed my life is available to you, no matter where you've been or what you've done. So live with purpose, love with intention, and trust that God's grace can rewrite your story in ways you never thought possible.